Well, good morning. Welcome to Debbie's Back Porch. So glad to have you with us. I've been seeing this video of something that looks just scrumptious. Cinnamon challah bread. The video is very short, so I thought that I would give it a try and show you my efforts and see if it turns out as wonderful as the video looks. So here are all the ingredients. You can pause and write them down, and hey, while you're paused, give us a thumbs up and subscribe. Then you'll get notice when I post new videos about twice a week. Now let's get cooking. You know, I love those little short videos, but they are so short that they often leave out tips on techniques. They assume you know things. So we're going to take just a second to show you the proper way to measure flour. We're measuring out 3.5 cups of flour, and you spoon it into your cup and then level it off. You don't dip your cup down in, because then you compact the flour. So I'm going to measure out 3.5 cups, and then I'll be back. Now I'm going to make this in my mixer, not directly on my counter with no bowl. I'm measuring in 2 eggs, and you break one and you put it in a bowl and you check it, and then you break a second one and you put it in the bowl and you check it. That way you don't ever end up putting a bad egg into your food, and you can check each egg separately. So in go my 2 eggs. That one's got 2 yolks. Cool beans. Then I'm putting in a 1/3 cup of oil, a neutral flavored oil. I don't ever use olive oil for this. I always use grapeseed oil or vegetable oil. Now I'm just putting all the ingredients into the bowl, because in the video they just mixed everything in. I'm using instant yeast, by the way. That's a teaspoon of salt. And generally, if you're using salt and yeast, you don't put them right in together. Salt tends to retard the growth of the yeast, but I'm trying to follow the video. I'm putting in a tablespoonful of yeast. The recipe calls for 2¼ teaspoons, which is 1 packet. And then I'm adding 1 tablespoonful of sugar. The recipe calls for 3 tablespoonsful of sugar, but I'm diabetic, so I'm cutting it down, and the sugar's not necessary for the yeast to process. Then I added the water, and then I'm going to start mixing this. Now on the sugar, bread does not need sugar for the yeast to rise. It's simply for flavor, and I've made quite a bit of challah, and I can tell you that a tablespoonful is enough. Plus we're adding brown sugar. So I'm going to mix this until all the ingredients pull together. And that really doesn't take very long. You can see it's already starting to pull clean. I'm going to punch it down just a little bit here with my spatula so that it'll pick up the last of that little bit of dry flour in the bottom. Sometimes, you know, with a KitchenAid, it doesn't get right there in the middle of the bottom. I probably need to make a small adjustment. But you can see it's picking it up now. So when it starts pulling clean from the bowl, I'm going to turn it up just a notch, and I'm going to set my timer for 7 minutes. And I'll just let it knead for 7 minutes. And this is the reason I use the mixer. That's pretty hard on my old hands. And after the 7 minutes, we have a velvety, beautiful dough. And it feels really good to your hands. I mean, it's sturdy and smooth. Challah is good bread. If you've never had challah bread, you can make it this way. You can just make it without anything in it. I've got a video where I show you how to do a 6-strand braid, and this one is going to be 3 strands. So I just form it into a ball. I've got my proofing bowl over here. You can use any bowl. And you want to oil your hands a little bit before you do this, and I put a little oil in the bowl, and I'm going to rub the top in it and then the bottom, and I'll put the lid on. Now, the recipe says to let it rise for an hour. I'm going to tell you, you let it rise till it's double in size, and that may take an hour, and it may take 45 minutes, and it may take an hour and a half. So watch it until it has a good rise on it, and then I'll be back. While the dough is rising, we're going to mix the filling, cinnamon and brown sugar. That is 1.5 teaspoons full of cinnamon. Now, I'll tell you now that I think there's a problem with this in the recipe. Now, I'm using Splenda Blend brown sugar, which in everything I've ever used it in before, it acts just like brown sugar. So the problem could be my substitution. But with this substitution, that's way too much oil, and I'll show you why when we get a little farther along. This is 3/4 cup brown sugar, or as I said, Splenda brown sugar blend. And then I'll add a pinch of salt. And we're going to mix this all up. And ideally, the brown sugar would absorb all the oil. And it looks like it does when I mix it. But when you start using it, then there's oil everywhere. And it really causes a problem in rolling up your strands for the braid. And as I'm mixing it, it looks like it's all absorbed. It doesn't look like there's too much. It looks just like in the little short video I followed. But I'm going to tell you, if I do this again, I'll use half that much oil. And I suggest that if you decide to make this, you use half as much oil, and then you can add more if you need it. And here's our dough after 1.5 hours. And you know, how long it takes bread to rise just depends on your room temperature, how fresh your yeast is. You just don't. If you're making this and you're new to making bread, don't count on 1 hour. It's done when it doubles in size. Now I've punched it down, and I'm going to work it just a little bit, mostly to get it into shape. I want to get it in a rectangle because I'm going to cut this into 3 almost equal, fairly equal, close to equal pieces. And I'll fold it a couple of times just because I like to, and to get it in the shape that I want it. And I'm going to weigh this because I don't want to eyeball it, because I do need for the 3 pieces to be pretty close to the same size. And I've got my little scale here. That looks good, doesn't it? That's a good dough. I like this. Now, you know, if I were a more organized person, I would have put a bowl on the scale and then weighed it. But no, I'm going to do it the hard way and fight with it to keep it from falling off. But we have about 27 ounces here, close to 28. So we're going to cut 3 sections at close to just a smidge over 9 ounces. And I'll eyeball the first one and see what we've got. And that one's good. So I'll cut the next ones. You know, I'm really not good at eyeballing. I'm the worst. So when it's something like this, I do weigh it. Okay, need just a little adjustment here. And here. So I'm going to cut off a little smidge and move it over. And that's close enough. So I'm going to let this rest just a few minutes. It just makes it easier to work. And that resting part sounds like a little small thing, but really you're going to be happier if you let it rest about 5-10 minutes before you start working with it. So I'm going to roll these out into rectangles and try to spread this brown sugar blend on each one and roll it up. Now, I'll tell you as I start this, because this got very frustrating. There is so much loose oil in this mixture that the oil spilled out. I mean, in the video, they spread it out really all over the piece of dough. I did that with the first one. I'll show you. And the oil leaked out so much that I almost couldn't seal this bread into a roll, and you have to put it into a roll if you're going to braid it into a 3-strand challah. So I spread it out, but it's really way too much oil. I'm going to have to do the next one differently, but I wanted to show you this process. So you'll recognize it when you try to do this recipe. I can't bring it out all the way to the end, and I'm supposed to roll it up, and I'm going to try to roll it up, but rolling it up just presses more oil out, and by the time I get over to the end, it's really going to, see all that oil? It's going to be difficult to seal. And you really, when you're making challah, you don't put a lot of flour out. You oil your hands a little bit and you let the bread stick to itself. But see all that? I mean, that's just, it just won't stick together. I'm going to add a little bit of flour to see if it'll soak up some of the oil and help me seal it. And that did help a little bit, but it's still seeping out. And so, and I really don't think it's because I used the Splenda blend, but, you know, it could be. When you make it, just check it. And I'm going to find some other way to do the other two, and I'll come back to that one. So from this point on, I'll press out as much of the oil as I can and try to just get the sugar and cinnamon mixture on here. And I'm going to put it right down the middle so that it doesn't spread out and keep me from making the strands. And this does work better, but there's still some oil that seeps out. And I'm afraid to go all the way down to the end because I do have to seal it at the end. And you can tell, see, I'm just going to make one fold on this and sort of pocket the cinnamon sugar mixture in there. And this works a lot better. It's a lot neater. There's still the issue of the oil seeping out a little bit, though. I'll show you as I go. And I'm going to seal that up, and then I'll just try to shape it so that I get the strand smooth. So I'll do the third one like this, and then I'm going to come back to that first one and see if I can make it a little bit neater. But there's even more oil seeping out. I'm kind of dabbing it with a paper towel to get rid of it. And I added some more flour to it. I'm going to go ahead and use this and see how it turns out. I'm just going to shape these all with my hands a little bit. Can't fold it. Can't roll it. If you try to roll it, it just pushes more oil out. So I'm just going to use my hands and elongate it a little bit, because however long you get these strands, and you need to get them about the same length, that'll be the length of your loaf. And really normally I would be rolling these, but I just can't roll this. And the more I work with it, the more oil comes out. To be fair, I did use the Splenda substitute, but I just don't think that explains this. And I've decided that next time I do this, and I will do it again, I'm going to use water instead of oil. Just enough water to dissolve the sugar and the cinnamon and to keep it very firm, and then it will stick to the bread and not flow. Okay, so I've fooled with that enough. Fooling with it anymore is just going to make it worse. So now I'm going to show you how to do a 3-strand braid. You put the outside one to the middle, then you put the outside one to the middle. Separate and shape as you go. Outside to the middle, over into the middle, over into the middle, over into the middle. There you go, and you do it to the very end until you can't do it anymore. Then you pinch it together and roll it under. Now there's so much oil here, I'm not certain it's going to stick together. I'll really give it a good pinch to make sure that it does. When you move to the other end, you reverse the process. You go under into the middle. And you're actually just continuing the same thing in a different direction. So you change it just a little bit. And this actually works better than starting at one end and going down. You get a little bit more even loaf that way. Now, pinch it all together and shape it up a little bit. And wipe off the excess oil. Even though it probably wouldn't hurt at this point, it's just going to come out and help brown the bread, I think. But it looks pretty good, all things considered. I'm not too unhappy with that. I think it'll look fine. So I've put a little cornmeal and just a tiny little bit of oil in the bottom of my cookie sheet. And we're going to let this rise. The recipe says 30 minutes. Again, you want to let it rise until it's nice and puffy. Already in a braid like this, it won't actually double. I put a little oil on a piece of plastic wrap here. Although there's enough oil on it, it probably wouldn't stick. But just as a practice, you put a little oil on a piece of plastic and cover it loosely. I never use a damp tea towel. For me, they always stick. So I use the plastic wrap. And we're going to let this rise for 30 minutes or until it's just nice and puffy. And I forgot to show you the poke test. Basically, you know it's done when you push your finger just about a 1/4 inch in and it leaves an indentation that's slowly filling up. I've shown you that in other videos. But this doesn't look too bad as it rose. Some of those rough spots rose out. I think it's going to look good. We're going to make an egg wash now. 1 egg with about a tablespoonful of water. Beat it together really well. And then we're going to paint our loaf with this egg wash. And the final appearance of your loaf of challah depends greatly on how thorough you are with painting the loaf with your egg wash. You want to get in all the little nooks and crannies. I have the oven heating to 375. It's actually preheated to 375. The directions say 30 minutes. What they don't say is that challah needs to cook to an internal temperature of about 200 degrees. I'll be back in 30 minutes. So it's been 30 minutes and it's beautiful. I want you to see all of the sugar and oil that's cooked out of it. So I'm going to check the temperature, and I'll tell you now it's only up to about 160 degrees. So 30 minutes is not enough. It would be gummy inside. So I'm going to put it back in the oven for about another 15 minutes. I should have tinted it because it's nice and brown. So it got a little browner than I wanted. If I had put a aluminum foil tint over it, I could have kept this pretty color. And this is after 15 additional minutes, and it is now at 200 degrees, which, well, it's just under, but that's close enough. And that's where you want your bread to be, your challah to be. Any enriched bread, actually, needs to cook to 200. And I've moved it to a rack for cooling. Please don't cut this until it's fully cooled. It takes an hour and a half to 2 hours to be fully cooled. It doesn't look too bad. I wish I had tinted it. It's a little brown, but it still looks good. And it smells heavenly. I'm going to cut this right in the middle because I want you to see the swirling inside. And I'll tell you that later I cut an end piece, and you don't see a lot of cinnamon on the end piece, but it tastes like cinnamon all the way through. So see that beautiful swirling? It really turned out well, except for some of the oil and sugar pooled at the bottom. But I don't think anybody's going to complain about that. Cinnamon challah, it tastes yummy. And with the corrections that I have discovered as I've gone along, I think I'm going to make this again. Using water, cooking it a little bit longer, tinting it the last 15 minutes. It's really scrumptious. Thank you for joining us on Debbie's Back Porch. Hope to see you again tomorrow.